Welcome to Markets Plus, where leading experts from across BMO discuss factors shaping the markets, economy, industry sectors, and much more. Visit bmocm.com/Markets Plus for more episodes.
I'm Eduardo Tobon, head of our Economic Advisory Group and Latino segment at BMO Commercial Bank. Latino-owned businesses are growing 44% faster than our national average, and yet face barriers to capital, contracts, and opportunity. In this episode of the Latino Leaders Index 500 series, Augustin de Kerversau, Chief Operating Officer of BMO U.S. Banking, sat down with Jennifer Garcia, Chief Operating Officer of Latino Business Action Network, LBAN. Together, they unpacked the data, the impact, and the solutions driving Latino entrepreneurship in the United States. Now, let's join Augustin and Jennifer.
My name is Augustin de Kerversau. I'm the Chief Operating Officer for BMO U.S. Banking. It's a particular pleasure to have Jennifer by my side here. Welcome.
Thank you.
You're Chief Operating Officer too. We have that in common.
That's right.
And you're going to tell us more about that. But perhaps let's start right at the beginning. Tell us about your organization and your work.
Yeah, well, thank you. Thank you, Augustin. Thank you, Eduardo, Jim. It's a pleasure to be here this evening. Thank you for including LBAN. I want to start a little bit about my personal journey and why I think the connection into LBAN. Well, my personal journey is I grew up, like many Latinos, I grew up in an entrepreneurial home. And if anybody thinks that entrepreneurship has any hint of glamour, that was absent from my experience. My dad was a landscaper, and so I grew up digging trees, gathering rock, latias, and we would sit on the side of the street and we would sell, to cars that were passing by. And so for me, entrepreneurship was a lot of work, physical work. It was long hours, and it had this grittiness to it, and I didn't like it. So what it did is it drove me straight to corporate America. And I spent a good chunk of my career in the finance industry working with money management firm, most recently with Bloomberg Financial. And I had the privilege of working with incredibly intelligent colleagues and clients. And I, to this day, can tell you, when I look at my client base, I can't recall a single one that was Latino. So 8 years ago, I come to LBAN, and I have the fortune of day in and day out working with Latino businesses, individuals who are building amazing companies, manufacturing, food manufacturing, construction, tech, you name it, all who happen to be Latino or Latina. I came to understand two things. The first one is I had a very distorted view of my community because I had attributed success to what I saw in the finance industry. So it was one of those moments, like a tourist moment when you go to a scenic overlook and you have that, those tourist microscopes and you put your head into it and everything's distorted and you don't really know what you're looking at until you adjust that little rusty wheel. And I began to see my community in a different light. The second thing that happened is I began to recognize that grittiness that I saw in my dad in his early stages of his company has been over-glamorized and over-celebrated. And what I mean by that is we put a lot of emphasis in that, wow, they have grit, they have resilience. But there's a reason why they have to have grit and resilience. And what I've come to know through my work at LBAN is really identifying why we're overcompensating in those areas. So to give you the backstory of who we are, we're a nonprofit, Latino Business Action Network, also known as LBAN. We partner with Stanford University, and our focus is growing the economy by empowering entrepreneurship. And so we look at our work in 3 different lanes. The first is research, and through research, we do our research at Stanford, and we survey Latino businesses and white-owned businesses for benchmarking purposes. And we're really looking to understand what is happening with the Latino cohort of businesses, because when we understand, then we can begin to do something about it. We could use those findings to influence policies, processes, institutions. So our research, we've been doing this now for about 12 years. We host a big convening at Stanford every year. And that's ongoing. It's a continuous, how can we get and inform the larger community around the data insights? The second area of work that we do is we run programs also at Stanford University. Our first one is for larger established companies that have a minimum of $1 million in annual revenue. And then we also run a startup accelerator, and this is for companies, early stage venture backable companies. Both of those programs are national, so we recruit businesses from all across the country. We're industry agnostic. Then our third area for us, and we were talking about this earlier, is ecosystem development. And I think, when we talk about ecosystem, that is a concept or a word that's commonly used and perhaps one of those pie in the sky concepts, but I want to define it for you and tell you a little bit about how we pursue that. We think about the business owner as the center of everything. You are the sun in our solar system. And who we need to put around you to orbit that. There is a number of stakeholders. We need to put mentors. We need to put subject matter industry experts around you. We need to put capital providers, bankers, CDFIs, the investment community. We need to put VCs and angel networks, corporate partners, because they often bring resources and certainly procurement opportunities, and other community field builders in that category. And when we begin to orbit our business owners with those different players, then we begin to create access to capital, access to contracts, access to resources, education, and so much more. And so there's a lot of work that goes in. You guys are doing a lot of this work too. There's a lot of work that goes into the ecosystem.
This is really interesting to understand how all of the pieces of the puzzle come together, the research, the accelerator, the business network and ecosystem, and it's like a whole package that you bring to the community. As I was reading the briefing for this event, my notes included a mention that the respected Latino Donor Collaborative released their refresh survey last week and found that the Latino communities contributed $4 trillion to US GDP. $4 trillion. To give you a sense, I speak under the control of Dr. Anderson here, that would be the fifth largest economy in the world. This is more than the GDP of France or the GDP of the UK. And, I've lived here for over 10 years now. It's very apparent, of course, in the Californian community, how much the Latino community contributes. It's very clear in the US, but it didn't hit me until I read this number, $4 trillion, fifth largest economy in the world. Because it's just embedded in everything we do, in every sector of the economy, in every geography in the US. Tell me more about the Latino business network in the US. What else do I not know about it?
Let me just tell you, I think there's a lot of misconceptions or unawareness when it comes to the Latino segment, the Latino business segment. We can start by saying, for the Latino community, when it comes to innovation, there is second to none. What does that mean? Is that Latinos are really the drivers of new business formation. In the last 6 years, which would include the years of the pandemic, we saw that the number of Latino-owned businesses grew by 44%. If I look at that same time period for white-owned businesses, we saw a decline of 3%. So what does that mean, right? In that period of time, if all of you business owners weren't in the country, weren't doing what you do, our country would have experienced a net decline in new businesses. Then we go in to look at, okay, well, what type of businesses are we creating? You might have a common perception of they're in restaurants or they're in cleaning businesses. And that may be true. And you're also in cybersecurity, you're also in AI, you're also in all of these other industries as well. But one of the industries that has the potential for high growth and wealth creation is tech. And so when we look at Latinos in this category, and we're looking at Latinos in the tech industry, we actually see that we over-index in that. So if we look, there's 5 million, roughly 5 million Latino-owned businesses. If we take that pie and we say how many of those are tech companies, we see that 19% of them are tech companies. Again, comparing to our benchmark white-owned companies, they are at 14%. So when we're looking at the growth for the innovation economy, not only to service these companies, but to invest in these companies, you really want to be tracking with the Latino segment. Then you look at revenue, and I think this is the important part of the story. Revenue growth. We see that revenue growth for Latinos also outpaces the national average. So what does that mean, right? Your middle market clients today are going to be your commercial clients tomorrow. Your small businesses today are going to be your middle market tomorrow. Even within the LBAN network, right? Our $1 million companies today are going to be 20 million. Our $50 million companies are going to be pushing 200 million. So revenue growth is a driving factor in our community. Now, we say all of these great stats, and I think what it really points to is that it is fueling the future economy. And so when we say what else do people don't know? There's a lot when we don't have that full economic picture. There's a lot to understand about the vibrancy and the contributions that Latinos are making.
The number that resonated with me is the divergence between the growth in businesses created by Latino people and the growth in other businesses in the same time period. The key for communities to be successful is to then have access, have equal access, have access to capital, have access to opportunities, have access to liquidity. This is in part why community networks like what you're running or what we're doing is important. Is the access of the Latino community equal? Is there an equal access to capital, to resources, to investments, and so on and so forth? And if not, what would be possible if it were?
But I'll tell you a little bit about what the data shows and what the data points out as some of the biggest challenges and barriers. The first two, I'm going to tell you the top three, and the first two revolve around capital. We know that capital is a critical component for scale and growth for any business owner. And we see that for Latinos, they are 60% less likely to receive a loan from a national bank. So right there, when we look at the ability for growth capital, working capital, that's a significant barrier. We also dug in a little bit because we wanted to understand, okay, well, what about approval rate? How are those looking? And when we looked at the approval rates, we cut it by different loan sizes. We saw that any loan application of $50,000 or more, Latinos were significantly under approved. So that's one, their access to debt capital. The second challenge that we see is the ability to access equity capital, right? So this is for your venture companies. If anybody is in that space, you know the stale number that is that less than 2% of VC funding goes to Latino founders. We talked about Latinos already over-indexing in tech. 2%, they're extremely underrepresented when it comes to the pool of VC capital. The third challenge that we see is procurement opportunities. We look at procurement opportunities, both public with government, federal and state governments, and also within private companies. They're significantly underrepresented in the amount of contracts that they receive, that Latinos receive. But secondly, and perhaps more shockingly, is we looked at the size of those contracts. And for Latinos, the federal contracts that they're receiving, they are 31 times smaller than white-owned businesses. Right there, barriers, right? For anyone that's trying to do business with corporates, with federal governments, those are stunt factors that are prohibiting growth and accelerated growth.
Yeah, those numbers are staggering. And you know what? We can do something about this. And at BMO, we're absolutely convinced of the power of being in the community, of the outreach. What's behind some of the numbers you mentioned is definitely not lack of desire to do business with the community. It's a lack of outreach. It's a lack of knowing how to get access to these capitals, knock on the right door, have the right application, ask for the right type of money, and so on and so forth. And the onus is on corporate America to be in the community and to be reaching out. Thankfully, there's organizations like the Index 500, like LBAN, that are here to help bridge that gap and to help be the hand-holding for these promising business owners who need access. What are some of the things that have worked for you over the years? Some of the programs, some of the strategies and tactics in ways that you can see impact positively the issue that we just discussed?
So I mentioned earlier that we run a couple programs at Stanford, and they are absolutely transformative. What it first does is it is a mindset shift for our businesses, right? If we can get our businesses to think bigger, we want to challenge what they have defined as an aspirational growth. We want them to think so much bigger than what they walked in the room with. And if we can do that, then we can provide the business principles, the education, the resources, and the ecosystem around them to actually attain those goals.
I see. Think big, have the full ambition of your business plan.
Absolutely. That's the first part. It's that mindset shift. How can I think of my company, not just in a 10% growth, but I want to double what I'm doing today. So we start with a mindset. And so the program itself, it's a 9-week program. It is transformative. However, what I believe is most powerful is what comes after any program, the LBAN program or any program that you've done. What comes after is that ecosystem, right? You have to have the infrastructure around these businesses. Our businesses have to have access to the different stakeholders because that's where they're operating day in and day out. And so for us, where we've seen success is really in building relationships with our ecosystem, right? Think again about that solar system that's orbiting. One of the things that I commend you all for doing here with the Index 500 is this is an initiative that creates the platform. It's a platform for convening. And when you create the room with companies that are in the index, companies that are not yet in the index, bankers in the room that will provide their expertise, when you create the room with all of these stakeholders, really powerful things begin to happen.
Yeah, we do. We do this for two reasons. We do this, first of all, because it makes a statement to the community that you just explained doesn't have full access to capital. And we want to tell that community, we see you. We're here. You contribute to the economy. We have the capital. Come and work with us. That's number one. The second is this concept of community and this element of trust. We were talking about this a little bit earlier. Why is the ecosystem more important? We could throw 100 clients in a room any day of the week. Why is this more powerful? It's because when you share a language, when you share a culture, when you share a center of interest in industry, you're much more likely to trust each other. And that's the basis for doing business. In fact, your motto at LBAN is do business with each other, get business from each other.
Do you love that?
Yeah, I love it. I love it. Tell me more about how that manifests with the business owners that you work with.
We ingrain this. We're like a mallet, ingraining this motto into our program participants, to our alumni. And here's why I think it's important, because that motto, what it initially does is it breaks down the walls of competition. And it changes this mindset of me to we, right? It's not about me feeling like I can't talk to you because we're both in construction. It's how can we grow together? That's the first part. The other part is onset, it could sound very transactional. Get business for each other, right? Do business with each other, get business for each other. That could sound very transactional. And what we also challenge our alumni to think about is let's broaden this definition, because it's not just transactional. It could be, but it's not just that. So I'll give you some examples of what that could look like. It could be that I am your target market and you would be great as a provider. And so I might purchase your product or service. It may be that I'm not your target market, but I know who is, and I can make some really strategic introductions for you. It could also mean, I have an investor on my cap table. They have done amazing work opening doors for me. They're not a big investor, but they've opened amazing doors. And I think that they would be interested in talking to you. So let me introduce you. So there's all these connections that could happen. I supply to Walmart, and I know you're a CPG company and you want to get in there. Let me introduce you to my contact. So all of these expand the definition of our motto in different ways that we could contribute to the network.
This illustrates the power of community, of course, and this also triggers a thought for me, which is you've got to align your business behavior with your personal values. And who you buy business from, what products you buy, which suppliers you choose, who you employ matters. And where you keep your money. This is true for all of us. Every day you make purchasing behaviors in personal and business life, and who you choose to give this business to matters. And I think that's what you guys are doing. You're connecting the dots between supply and demand, between different needs and wants and opportunities. Let's open up a little bit. You've been doing fantastic work. You've been having an incredible impact on hundreds, thousands of entrepreneurs over the years. Your numbers speak for themselves. What's your strategy going forward? How are you going to have an impact next year, in the next 3 years? What does success look like in 2030?
Okay, so I think there's a couple things in that question. When we look at how we can make meaningful impact and change and progress for our community is not anything that I'm going to do in my seat, but it's what we are going to do collectively. It's the doors that we will open for one another. It's the insights that we will share for each other that will then influence, right? We lead with data. Because if our data can influence, we hope that it goes back to BMO. We hope that it goes back to federal policies that really can understand what is needed to help these business owners thrive. So it's really part of this social, professional networks that we collectively make a difference and navigate. And I think it's important to understand why we all contribute to this work. And when I go back to our fantastic contributions that Latino businesses are making, it's important to know a couple things. When a Latino or Latina is a business owner, they create 9 times more wealth than a non-business owner. So when we're talking about how we elevate communities, how we create wealth, generational wealth, entrepreneurship is a powerful vehicle to do so, which means we have to invest in the infrastructure. The other thing we look at is what is our collective benefit? What is the country's collective benefit? We found that if we can get Latino businesses to that equitable access of capital contracts and they're at the same size of their white counterparts, we would add $3.3 trillion to the economy at the end of this decade.
Wow. This is your...
So, of course.
Yes, please.
That's a benefit for all of us in this room, but it's a benefit for Scott and his world, right? It's a benefit for the larger country.
Okay, we're going to build this in our economic scenario for 2030. Thank you for being with us today. Thank you for the work that LBAN is doing. Thank you for creating the opportunity for this community to overcome the barriers that may exist at first, which you discussed at the beginning of your presentation. The work that you and your organization does help move past that. This is why we at BMO are so proud to work with you, to work with the Index 500. You know, our motto, our purpose is to boldly grow the good. And in that, there is bold, there is grow, and there is good. And I feel like this is exactly what we're doing with LBAN and with the Index 500. So thank you so much for being with us.
Thanks for listening. You can follow this podcast on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or your favorite podcast app. For more episodes, visit bmocm.com/marketsplus.
The views expressed here are those of the participants and may not necessarily represent those of BMO Capital Markets, its affiliates, or subsidiaries. For BMO disclosures, please visit bmocm.com/podcast/disclaimer.